Morning, boys. What's going on?
Well, you got it. You have all the information. You know what's going to happen. You know that this morning is when the plan is pulled off. What exactly does happen? How quickly does it move? And how many new bears are you anticipating this morning?
Yeah, that's a great question because there was a ton of action this weekend around the league, right? A watered-down free agent group as a whole lost even some more over the weekend when you saw teams around the league moving to get deals done with some of their own players and keeping guys in place. And I don't know that we necessarily saw names of players that would have profiled for the Bears or at positions that the Bears would be shopping at, but you were seeing quality players removed from the marketplace nonetheless. And so you've got a lot of teams with a lot of money to spend, and it's going to push some of these numbers up. But things kind of happen fast. So if the Bears are able to agree to terms with a player or two today, that would not come as a surprise to me, and I think that could be the case for some other teams as well. I mean, it's possible that most of the fireworks are done well in advance of the start of the new league year on Wednesday, right?
Oh, yeah. I predicted that Drew Dalman would be a Bear today. Maybe Khalil Mack would be returning, Brad. How likely are either of those scenarios? And who else would be interested in a Drew Dalman to drive the bidding up, perhaps?
Well, you get teams that could be in the market for a center. No question about that, because they're just difficult to find. And it's how high does Dalman want to get paid? How much does he want? And how high are teams willing to go? Because there's a big gap right now between number one and number two. Creed Humphrey's at $18 million a year in Kansas City as the highest paid center in the league in an extension that was signed back in August. I think it was signed it might have been signed the day the Bears played the Chiefs in the preseason, because he was getting some congratulations there outside the locker room. And he surpassed Frank Ragnow of the Detroit Lions, who signed a 4-year extension back in, I believe it was May of 2021, guys. So May of 2021 to August of 2024, and Ragnow's deal's coming in at $13.5 million a year, simply based on the fact that Dalman is in free agency. He's going to be able to push that price north. The 49ers have been looking to get better on the offensive line. That's a possibility. Atlanta would love to keep him, but salary cap space is an issue for the Falcons. They're one of the few teams that has really been squeezed by the cap this offseason, and that partially is probably due to the Kirk Cousins mistake that that organization made.
We know we have a good sense of what the Bears' needs are, and we understand a lot of it starts in the trenches. Do you anticipate? We've heard a ton of talk about a reunion, if you will, with Khalil Mack. Is that the guy that they've identified at the defensive end position? Are they looking for more help there? Do you think that is something that they need to get done in free agency just ahead of the draft for before you know what's available in that spot? Yeah.
Well, they've got to get a defensive lineman in the next couple of days, you would figure. Whether it's an edge or a tackle, I don't know that there's a huge you could go either direction. I don't know that there's a huge difference between what's more important for them. They probably need an edge over a tackle at this point, but they need quality and they need quantity at both of those positions.
Right.
But there are some edge players out there, and there's some interesting tackles. Jonathan Allen is in the mix. Heck, you could sign him today, right? Because he was released. You don't have to wait until Wednesday. Khalil Mack, people have been awful excited about him for a while. I believe the Bears would have some interest in him. He's 34 years old. What's the contract going to look like? He's going to get interest from other teams. This morning, you saw the Commanders link to him. Wouldn't be surprising to me if Vic Fangio in Philadelphia looked at Mack as a potential replacement for Josh Sweat, who will probably leave Philadelphia via free agency. So that might be one to keep an eye on. But that's another guy, like, how comfortable are you going to be with him in terms of production at the age, and how many teams are interested that are going to force you into guaranteeing a portion of that contract? But they definitely need help at defensive end. And Mack's a guy who, although the sack totals were down quite a bit this past season, I think he finished with 5 for the Chargers. He's been a durable performer, and he's still excellent versus the run. And you would think that the sack numbers could rebound a little bit this coming season.
So, Brad, we don't talk much about the need at safety the Bears have with the uncertainty around Jaquan Brisker and Kevin Byard just being an aging veteran, that you might always need depth at that position. But it's a pretty good year for free agent safeties. Do you think the Bears will be active in that market? And who, if they are, appeals to you?
There were a lot of safeties available last year as well. And the Bears identified Byard, and I think they did all right with that. In terms of his play, it could go a lot of different directions there. I think you start out today with your focus primarily in the trenches, right? And you go for it there. If you want to move quickly at the safety position, you're probably going to have to pay a little bit of a premium. So if you wait 72 hours, maybe you're getting a guy at a little bit better number in the middle of the week or later in the week than you would out of the gate on Monday, if that makes sense. But I remember looking at the list of safety names a year ago, like legit safeties that had starting experience, and it was so deep. There might have been more than 15 names at the time, and it just and you look at it and you say, well, that's crazy. How could there be this many guys out there? And part of it's positional value, right? There were pretty good players that had been in places for a while, but they started to make some more money, and the team decided to, we're going to put some of this money in another position and go young at safety.
It's hard not to try to read the tea leaves on a lot of the moves that have been made already. You look at different teams filling needs, different players moving around, and then you wonder, okay, well, who's left for this team to get or that team? Like, we know who the teams are that have special we know what their needs are. We know what their money is. And it all seems to be kind of in a state of flux. So in other words, rather than get involved in bidding wars for various people, we've seen a lot of different trade movement that maybe wasn't anticipated. A team like New England went out and signed Harold Landry. You wonder, does that mean that they're now convinced that Abdul Carter either won't be there at 4 or they won't take him at 4? I don't know. I don't know how much of reading into the draft goes on as we see the free agent market fill up. Is that a question for after the league year begins, or after the free agent market is picked over?
Yeah, I think you start to put that together after the thing's picked over a little bit. But that's also a good point, and you're because it's a puzzle, and everybody's trying to put their own little puzzle together here. And one of the primary reasons why I say this is a poor year for free agency, just overall, is there's a real lack, guys, of players that are coming out of that first contract. And Drew Dalman's one of the exceptions to that, okay? He is a guy that just completed his first contract. And so you're trying to buy a guy then in the prime years of his career. A lot of these guys that you're looking at, some of these names in free agency, they're 29 turning 30, they're 30 turning 31. You're getting them on a third or fourth contract, and that's when it can get really dangerous. Like, it is a lot easier to actually hurt your team than help your team via free agency. And so everybody's got to kind of do that puzzle piece thing where, okay, here are our needs, here are our wants. This is the strength this morning in terms of what's available, and this is kind of how we eye some of the strengths looking toward the draft with the capital that we will have available. And although the Bears have made a couple moves here lately to get some offensive linemen, more help for Caleb Williams, they've still got strong draft capital as you look ahead to next month.
Brad, I guess we have to ask because we don't know the entire answer to, but do you know where the Bears plan to play Jonah Jackson and Joe Thuney? Because if the answer is one way, maybe it affects the way they're going about free agency, or maybe they're waiting to see what they get in free agency to answer that question fully, because we've talked about the possibility. They're both left guards primarily. Jonah Jackson had good success in Detroit on the left side, was tried at center, didn't work in L.A. Joe Thuney has played left tackle in a pinch, but he also, Olin Cruz suggested he might play right just to make room for Jackson at left. So all these kind of questions might be related to who else they get in free agency.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you hope that they can land Drew Dalman, so they're not trying to play Jonah Jackson at center, and because he played a little bit of center for the Rams. It seems like whatever they tried in L.A. did not work well, and that's an example of how you can hurt your team in free agency, right? The Rams signed him to a huge contract, and the thing blew up on him. So at this point, it's a little difficult to say, though, because you're right. They're both left guards, and I think what the Bears have started is a process of just accumulating assets or talent. We need to have more talent in the offensive line room is probably what they're saying. So they're going out and getting guys. And as you put it together, assuming they can get a center that they're comfortable and happy with, and Dalman would foot that bill, then you're looking at, okay, let's figure out this left guard, this right guard situation. And they could be looking potentially for a left tackle in the draft. It's not a good free agency season for left tackles. We saw Ronnie Stanley extended by the Baltimore Ravens over the weekend. Right. So they had so many issues on the offensive line. They had to go out and acquire better players. And then when the dust settles, I think you figure out who's going to play where and how are you going to line them up.
Yeah, and we've talked about this idea as well, that the trade acquisitions doesn't change your need for offensive line. In other words,
there's temporary fixes.
That's what I mean.
Temporary
so
fixes,
a stopgap measure, you got to be aware of that so that you're constantly kind of replenishing the unit so that you're ready when people kind of age out to move in the next guy. And that's the line being, how do you improve the offensive line? Well, for the Bears, it was get a time machine, because you needed to have done that already, but that now they've struck and they've got some stopgaps, but that doesn't change the need to invest in the line of scrimmage.
Not at all. Not at all. And like, it doesn't change their need to draft offensive guards this year.
Yes.
Right? Because you're leaning on the head coach and Ben Johnson having a relationship with Jonah Jackson, and you're trusting in him that they're going to get a pretty good player there, a guy that the scouting community felt highly about at this time a year ago when he entered free agency and signed with the Rams. But he's had some availability issues. You're betting on Joe Thuney remaining an elite player for another 2 years. If you're exceedingly lucky, probably 3. But you don't have a lot in the pipeline behind that, and you need to be prepared. And their pipeline has been too thin, and they've been too unprepared for too long. So there's much more work to do on that offensive line, unless they're just looking to kind of patch together and then completely turn their attention to the defense, which I don't believe is the case.
Brad, on Friday, Geno Smith goes from the Seahawks to the Raiders and creates all kinds of possibilities as a domino effect. Sam Darnold could go to Seattle. What do the Vikings do at quarterback? Aaron Rodgers has been linked to Pittsburgh, the Giants, and maybe even the Vikings. Oh, boy, what about Justin Fields? What's the next domino, do you think, to fall in the quarterback situation?
Yeah, I would think the next one's probably Sam Darnold, right? Because Sam Darnold is going to be the top target for more than one of those teams. So it's going to be a situation where teams are going to want to get clarity on Darnold. Do we have a shot at Darnold? Can we get Darnold in here? And if not, then they pivot to whatever their plan B is. But it never seemed realistic that the Vikings would bring him back. Now with how that they feel about J.J. McCarthy and the opportunity for him to be the quarterback of the future, especially given, how the year ended for Darnold and the Vikings. So that just didn't seem realistic. You'd imagine Minnesota makes an effort to get Daniel Jones re-signed, and if Jones looks at kind of how things went for Darnold, it might be the best move for his career is to get coached by Kevin O'Connell for a full off season, for a full season, and see what happens from there. But Darnold to Seattle seems to make sense, but you just don't know and how much a team's going to want to pay him. But it's going to be interesting to see. Hey, for once, there's not drama involving the Bears in the quarterback position.
Yeah, that is an unusual place to be. So how much better can they get? I mean, let's say they get the center. Let's say they go into the draft and take another lineman, take a tackle. How much better can this team become in one off season?
Well, they're going to have to hit in the draft to really make themselves better. Mm-hmm. Like the center, Drew Dalman's a good player. He's a good player. If this contract comes in and he's slotted as the second highest paid player in the league, like you're not getting the second best center in the National Football League, right. But he's taking advantage of the open market and free agency and how things work. And he's a clear upgrade over what they've had at a position where they've had 4 different week 1 starters over the last 5 seasons. So help is needed there, and you can understand them wanting to put resources into that position. If they get a Khalil Mack, okay, yeah, they've got an upgrade. They've got a starter opposite Montez Sweat. They don't have 2018 Khalil Mack. Like, let's get
right.
That picture of that player out of your mind. They've no longer got that guy. But they're going to be more competitive. I think they're going to have some actual leaders in the locker room now. We're looking at some of the moves they've already made with Thuney and some of these other possibilities. So they're getting incrementally better in a lot of ways that they need improvement. But to build this thing right and to make it happen, you've got to find difference makers in the draft. You want to call them blues, whatever you want to call them. You need to find those guys in the draft. You need to bring them in and you need to develop them. Look at how the Lions were built up.
Right.
With moves in free agency that would be probably described as sparingly over the last 4+ years. Look at what the Baltimore Ravens do. Are they ever big shoppers in free agency? Look at some of these perennial contenders. They typically don't make a lot of headlines this week. So a lot of headlines this week for the Bears will be exciting because they've got some new players on board that can help move them in the right direction with the new coaching staff. But to ultimately win and have a core in place that's going to be able to have you in contention routinely, you've got to start drafting more effectively.
Great stuff, Big Z. Thank you, buddy.
Thanks, Brad.